Welcome to the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm David Haugh, along with Dan Wiederer. Hope that you enjoyed your weekend more than the Bears did. 35-13 losers to the Bills. 8th straight loss. First time they haven't won a game since October 24th. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. But on the bright side, they are now within a half game of the Houston Texans. They can possibly get the #1 overall selection. We will talk about all of that on this podcast. We hope that everyone had a great holiday weekend. We did not give you our instant reaction. Saturday night, it was Christmas Eve, and we understand that everyone was probably doing other things. So, Dan, after being at Halas Hall, after being at Soldier Field, and after listening to Matt Eberflus on 2 days after the Bears' 8th straight loss that dropped them to 3-12. What are your overall impressions?
Yeah, no, I just think this is a team that is what it is right now, and there's not much that we can do about it. And we're just going to have to wait and see where things go. I'll get to a couple of tweets I sent out on Monday morning that caused quite a stir, just to kind of get your take and your perspective on some of it. I did think it was notable on Monday afternoon to hear Matt Eberflus talk about, from his perspective as a coach leading this Bears team, the value in succeeding down the stretch of the season, particularly trying to win one of these last two games, division games against the Lions and the Vikings left on the schedule. And to hear Matt talk about the need for this team to figure out ways to meet the moment. And I think his word was game deciding execution, right? In the game deciding moments, having a team that understands how to execute and get over the hump. And that is meaningful to him as the head coach of the Chicago Bears. It was interesting to hear those sentiments come from his mouth. They echo some of the things that we've been saying for a while. And we'll just see what happens here with 2 games left. Again, I think we're all sort of at the stage now where the faster that locker room door closes behind us on January 9th, the better, because this season has just kind of become an exercise in chasing your tail.
Before we get to the opening drive, I think it bears repeating and reinforcing what Matt Eberflus did say exactly when asked about the possibility of shutting down Justin Fields, something that got a lot of attention. I was on the air Monday morning on the Mully and Haugh show, and for 4 hours, people debated, texted, called, and shared their opinions that if they were I don't want to say that it was a consensus, but I heard from a lot of people in the fan base that thought that would be the wise choice to go. Shut him down because he got his foot stepped on, because he has, aggravated the shoulder injury and all these things. If you expose him to harm's way. Had one caller ask the question, what happens if he tears his ACL in the final 2 games? Well, I understand there's risk involved. It is football. But Matt Eberflus, who understands and is better than we do and is the head coach, said what when asked that possibility flatly, Dan? He said basically,
absolutely not were his quoted words. Absolutely not were his words.
And why?
Because he sees value in a young quarterback at this stage of development gaining experiences. He sees value in a player like Justin Fields seeing 2 division opponents on the way out the door and trying to use those as barometers to see how much progress he made. He played better in game 2 against the Packers than he did in game 1 against the Packers. Now you get a second chance at the Lions, a second chance at the Vikings. This passing offense needs to make strides. I think that there is a misperception of what Justin Fields has the potential to be versus what he is now. And the only way you get to the potential of what you ultimately can be is by making growth and overseeing your development. And I get it. Justin had his foot stepped on the last pass attempt that he threw on Saturday against the Bills, outside of the pocket trying to make something happen, and almost threw a pick and got his foot stepped on. Shoulders bothering him. He's gotten through that. But there is so much to gain from gaining experience. I get it. I mean, but this goes back to what you've been saying and uncomfortable with really since October, this lost season, and then just losing sight of what is actually supposed to be being done here. And shutting down your franchise quarterback because of fear is just an admission that you're just kind of lost and you don't know where you're going.
A lot to get to in that, a lot to get to this week. Let's get going with our opening drive.
It's time for the opening drive.
All right, Dan, going back to Saturday, 9 degrees at kickoff, 9 below, wind chill. It was an unpleasant experience for everyone involved. Probably was fun to go through if you are a fan and you're a shirtless guy and you got on television and you can tell your kids one day that you were there. the day that the Bears bottomed out. But I don't know how many takeaways there really were to get from the game itself. 35-13, the Bears were competitive for the first half. They had a halftime lead, and then the Bills woke up. They were in that game because Josh Allen kind of let them stay in that game. But to me, the overriding takeaway was the talent disparity between a Super Bowl contender and one of the worst teams in the league.
Well, David, when I watched it back on Monday morning, it was more clear to me that the Bills came to town with like their C+ offensive effort, maybe C+, somewhere in that range. And they rolled up 429 yards and won by 22 points, right? And so it's a clear tell of, obviously the Bears were shorthanded. They shut down another couple defenders on Friday with Jalen Johnson and Kindle Vildor going to injured reserve. And they're just trying to make the best of what they have left on the playing field. But the fact that the Bills could do just about whatever they wanted in the second half was telling to me, because you had running backs going for long touchdown runs without being touched. You had the Bears dominated on both lines of scrimmage, offensively and defensively. You had a team, and we'll get into this at greater length in our QB1 segment, in the Bears that couldn't get anything going offensively after their opening drive of the game, only managed 6 points after the first drive of the game. And it was in large part because the Bills made schematic adjustments and decision to make sure that Justin Fields, the runner, wouldn't beat them. And he didn't. And then they didn't. And so there are things to unpack in there. While the result was predictable, while the result wasn't surprising, there are some things within that game that are illuminating if you look closely.
On my list of concerns, or at least the weaknesses that were exposed, the running defense, again, topped the list. 254 rushing yards by the Bills, the worst showing against the run at home since 2007. The Bears have backups replacing backups. I get it. In the secondary, I felt like they had 3 rookies at cornerback, which if you do that and they're all kind of in backup roles, except for Kyler Gordon, you're going to have some problems. Jaquan Brisker did not have a good day. He's had a solid season, but he's one of those guys that on one of those 31-yard touchdown runs by Devin Singletary did not sell out and was not in the right position and the position you're used to seeing him in. So run defense, number one, to me was a big problem. The offensive line was a mess. Larry Borum was exposed at left guard. You thought that was an opportunity for him. I don't think he passed that test. And then just overall, you just look at the execution and the lack of a downfield passing game with wide receivers who are just not getting open.
Yeah.
It's all related.
Yeah, well, and the full context is going to be important to this one, just given the conditions out there on Saturday afternoon. And so you do give the Bears a little bit of wiggle room and a little bit of leniency, given the fact that the passing game couldn't get going because the wind was a disaster. The cold was, Arctic and extreme. And you even see it on Cairo Santos's first point after touchdown attempt, where the snap comes and poor Trent Gill's got like a catcher trying to catch a wild pitch, get out there, grab it, get it down, and Cairo Santos makes that kick. More on the kicker in a little bit as well, but so you give him a little bit of wiggle room. But I think the concern is that if Justin Fields doesn't make rapid and marked growth as a passer within the Bears passing offense, even when they get him upgraded talent on the offensive line and receiving core, this league is full of really good coaches and really gifted athletes who are going to understand that if you're a one-man gang and the only thing they have to do to stop you is take away your threats as a runner, you're in big trouble. And so Saturday was just not a warning of that, but it was at least I don't know what you'd call it, but it was just a show that you better have more in your toolbox as an offense. And that's on Justin. It's on Luke Getsy. It's on Ryan Poles. It's on Matt Eberflus. It's on everyone to collectively get the pieces together that can bring together a balanced, versatile, complete offense so that you don't have to rely on a 50-yard scramble every week in order to have offensive success.
It was a grim reminder, of how far you have to go, I feel like, because the Bills are a team that you can envision playing for the AFC Championship, getting to the Super Bowl, and they were in a game that they basically controlled, but it wasn't really reflected. The score ended up, I think, more indicative of the kind of game it was.
Yeah.
They were 8 points down, one possession with 9 minutes to go, and then the Bills pulled away. I want to ask you this before we get into our game balls. So Leslie Frazier, a guy that you know well, defensive coordinator, is getting a lot of credit for the way that they defended Justin Fields. And I don't know, in talking to Dave Wanstead on the radio and just talking to other people and watching it again, I essentially think that they did was their defensive ends were just smart and disciplined. They were committed to containing Justin Fields in a way that was just responsible. And you build a pocket, the 4-3, the cover 2, the shell that you create, the umbrella, however you want to describe it, is very safe. And you concede certain things. But what the defensive ends in this defense did while Oliver was blowing it up inside, they were able to contain Justin Fields and not let him get outside to the edge and not make one guy miss and everything be disruptive. How did you see it unfold, and what was your best understanding of why they were as successful as they were in limiting Justin Fields to 11 yards on 7 carries?
So we can talk about a couple things here, and one of them is what you just talked about. Look, if you were going to defend the Bears' read option game, you're going to want your, we saw the Falcons earlier in the year deploy the mesh charge approach and basically use something in their toolbox to make sure that Justin Fields handed the ball off and didn't get to the edge. The Bills used a whole different approach by keeping their defensive ends out wide and trying to limit things there. They also used spies, both up front and on the back end of the defense to just make sure they had eyes on Justin Fields at all times. This is going to be a strategy that opposing defenses can lean on until the Bears have someone else that can be a weapon that can make them pay for that. Now, again, we can get into some of this later. Justin Fields' first touchdown pass in the opening drive to Dante Pettis is a prime example of what happens when you're such a threat as a runner, because the nickel cornerback never took his eyes off the quarterback, and Dante Pettis ran uncovered to the back corner of the end zone, and it was a pitch and catch that is, schoolyard. You're going to complete it every time for a touchdown, and that's where Justin's explosiveness as a runner now has bought the Bears advantages offensively that they can utilize. I'm glad you bring up Leslie, because I've said for a long time that I would love to see him get a head coaching job somewhere that has at some point a quarterback in place. His time in Minnesota was plagued by an organization that couldn't get that position right, and a guy who is really good as a motivator, really good as an X's and O's strategizer, failed there. And so it's going to be really interesting. He interviewed for a handful of jobs last offseason, including the Bears job. And this offseason cycle, you figure he's going to get a few more looks from around the league, and it's going to be really interesting to see where he goes. Obviously, an 85 Bear, right, who was very meaningful to that defense and the way they played, and he understands the game, and it'd be really cool to see what he could do with an opportunity.
We digress, but curious because of your background covering the Vikings and knowing Leslie as you do, did he overlap with George Payton in Denver? They don't necessarily have a quarterback. They have one they're stuck with, but Russell Wilson is the guy. And now that they made the big move of getting rid of Nathaniel Hackett, I wonder if Leslie Frazier's name will come up, because what Denver needs is almost what they got rid of. Vic Fangio was not the most dynamic head coach, but he did provide a measure of stability. He was somebody who was a football coach, was a head coach in charge of keeping the train on the tracks, and it derailed this season badly under Nathaniel Hackett. I wonder if Leslie Frazier's name surfaces as a possibility in Denver.
It could. I don't think that's going to be the optimal fit. George Payton and Leslie did overlap in Minnesota for his entire time as the head coach there. I think they would probably go in a new direction. It's going to be interesting to see what that new ownership group of the Broncos does with George Payton at year's end as well. Yeah. And there's no certainty there. That's a fascinating situation. I was watching that game with family on Christmas Day at the living room at my mother's house, and I just said, with 5 minutes to go in the first half, I said, they may not let Nathaniel Hackett get on the plane after this. This is one of those high-profile losses that just opens up the trapdoor under you. And sorry, thanks for stopping by, but this job isn't for you. And it turns out that way on Monday. So, again, we digress. But that's another indication for the Bears. You say, okay, well, at least we didn't make a mistake that colossal, right? I mean, Nathaniel Hackett was one of the candidates they interviewed for their head coaching position. And when you talk to people last winter, there was great enthusiasm about what his energy and teaching style could do for a young quarterback. What Nathaniel Hackett showed in Denver is there's a lot more to the head coaching job. And if you're not prepared for game management and situations and the ability to just get your arms around everything, it can get away from you in a hurry. And clearly that happened to the Broncos.
I don't think he had a great day, but I maintain that the Bears got the right Packers assistant coach when they hired Luke Getsy, and they stayed away from Nathaniel Hackett. All right, back to the Bears and Bills. Let's give out our game balls. I don't know if there's anybody that jumps out at you, Dan, but if you had to give out a game ball from Saturday's 35-13 loss, who'd you give it to?
Well, I'm going to give you two, and then you're going to have to scrounge for the third. But I'm going to give you Kyler Gordon first because of the ability to take the ball away in consecutive weeks and the ability to continue to show growth in his rookie season that tells you, okay, we are trying to identify building block pieces, guys that can be game-changing playmakers on a team that eventually will want to contend for a playoff spot. Kyler Gordon is that, and the interception in the first half against Josh Allen is just great awareness where, they're playing a coverage when the tight end goes across the field. Kyler Gordon passes him off, and Josh Allen doesn't recognize that he's retreating and throws a ball that he thinks is to a receiver who's got leverage. And Kyler Gordon just retreats on the play and goes up and shows his ball skills. I think as much as anything, he gets the game ball for his ball skills and picking that pass off. Again, 2 weeks in a row of that, you're moving in the right direction when you've got a talent in the headliner of your draft class to take the ball away. I'm also going to give you Matt Adams, and just for the sheer fact that the fumble that he forced was the hits principle personified. It's teaching tape in terms of getting to the ball carrier and then getting a fist on the football and knocking that thing out and getting a takeaway that Elijah Hicks ended up recovering on the ground. And so it's just an important thing down the stretch of the season for Matt Eberflus to have guys' attention enough to continue to execute the things he's been preaching. Matt Eberflus didn't give us an exact number, but said after the game on Saturday that there was a goal that the Bears set for their last 4 games. Well, they've got 6 takeaways in their last 2 games. I would imagine, if I was guessing, that they maybe set a goal of 10 takeaways for the last 4 games. They got 6 of them in the last 2. Let's see what they can do against the Lions and the Vikings.
Only getting 3 points out of those 3 takeaways. That was the disappointing part. The fact that you created them is a good one. Those are good ones. I'm going to be the guy that is always thinking of the kicker, always going in that direction because I am sympathetic to what they go through. Cairo Santos, the Bears scored 13 points. He was responsible for 7 of them. And I think that when you look at what he has been through, and last week there was a seminar basically citywide on Cairo Santos' mental state and whether or not it was physical and mental and don't talk about this and do talk about that. He kicked a 35-yarder, he kicked a 37-yarder, and he kicked a PAT. And he did it on a day where the conditions were as bad as they're going to get. The ground was like concrete. The temperature was distracting and the winds were swirling. So I think that Cairo Santos came back in a big way, and for that, he gets my game ball.
So Tyler Bass would echo your sentiments because Tyler Bass, who's one of the better kickers in the league, missed 2 kicks and just noted after the game that it was really, really difficult to judge anything out there on that field. There's a point pregame, David, where we're sitting up in the press box and Bigsy and I are looking at the goalposts in the south end zone and the flags are pointing due north. And then we look to the north end zone and the flags in the north end zone are pointing due south. And then we look at the American flag above the stadium and it's blowing directly to the lake. And you're like, okay, good luck anyone trying to judge this wind because you look in 3 different places in the stadium right now and it's blowing in 3 different directions. And so good luck being a kicker. And to your point, we saw it on a Sam Mustipher snap that got away. Yeah. We saw it on a Patrick Scales snap that didn't get away. We saw it on a couple Josh Allen passes that fluttered. The football was impossible to track. And so again, for Cairo to be dealing with what he was dealing with, come in and make 3 kicks is no small thing.
All right, so let's get to our 3-word reviews. We get back to you solicited some post-game. Good idea, and you've got some that you want to share before we share our own if you were able to come up with your own, because some of the ones that we got on Twitter at Take the North Pod, pretty good.
This is I got to give old colleague Rich Campbell credit for introducing this because you get some creativity, you get some wit, you get some good stuff when you solicit these. And so here's a handful of the ones that I liked from Saturday evening. Mike White at I am Mike White gave us the festive ho ho do, which I loved.
And Homer Simpson.
Similar theme from Matt M., who gave us Ho Ho Hum, which I think was also appropriate for this Ho Hum team and this Ho Hum season. We go to at Grignock gave us Tanky McTank, which I know you love.
I love that one. Tanky McTank. Okay.
All we're doing is tanking. Eric Hansen gave us Fields' legs matter, which is something that we just talked about a minute ago, and we'll talk about more in a bit in terms of the need to use that as a weapon, and now the need to find something that complements that offensively. At Audio Jack, at Audio Jack, not sure, gave us almost the offseason. Talked about that a minute ago. Okay. I can't wait for the offseason for about 15 reasons.
2 more games.
But I think that's there. At Zach Ferguson, or at ZFerg94, Zach Ferguson gave us "Hurt So Good," which I think is a note on those who are enjoying the losing because of what it means for their draft status.
Also, and then, you cannot overlook the reference to John Cougar Mellencamp, proper that I am.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. I thought you were going to sing it for us, right?
No, I don't think we'll do that. No.
It's so good.
There you go.
Come on, baby. Make it. All right, and then our last one comes from
edit that out.
Our last one comes from at Tank13917, and he says, "Future looks bright."
Okay. If he says so. Hey.
Yeah. So that leads me naturally to mine, which was close to what?
Close to what?
This theory that the Bears are close. I will get into more of this in a minute. I don't know what they're close to, and I don't know why the future is looking so bright to so many people. But yours.
Okay, mine would be coldest reality yet.
Love it.
Coldest reality yet, certainly in the way of the temperature. 9 degrees, 9 below wind chill. I think it got down to 12 below wind chill according to some reports.
Yeah.
And just the reality that, these are the Bills. This is what a Super Bowl team looks like. This is what happens when they wake up from going through the motions in the first half. And this is what you are. Look in the mirror, and boy, you are not one off season away, maybe 2 off seasons away from being the team that is opposite you on the sidelines. So that was, to me, the 8th loss in a row, the coldest reality yet.
I love it. I love it. And listen, it's not going to be as cold in Detroit. I'm going to go spend New Year's Day in an indoor stadium at Ford Field, and hopefully the Bears will warm up in some regards there against a Lions team that's been hot recently, but came back down to earth this week, and then obviously has one of the worst defenses in the league, which should be a get well remedy.
All right, let's get into our QB1 segment. Dan, Justin Fields did not have a day that he wanted to have on the ground. Certainly, he came in with 1,000 yards. He added 11 to that, so now he's still 196 away from breaking Lamar Jackson's single-season rushing record for quarterbacks. Not his day. In terms of a defining moment, though, what was Justin Fields' defining moment in your mind?
Well, this is for Justin Fields and the entire offense. It's the fourth quarter. It's early on in the fourth quarter. It's 21-10, and you have just had a first down inside the red zone overturned on replay review to give the Bills the ball. 2 plays later, Josh Allen gives you the ball back with an awful throw to James Cook over the middle that Nick Morrow intercepts and gives you possession inside the red zone at the 18-yard line. This is when we talk about game-deciding execution. This is what Matt Eberflus is asking for. It's 21-10. A good team, a team that's building, a team that is on its way to something, puts that ball in the end zone, makes it 21-17, and puts all the pressure on the Buffalo Bills to respond. The Bears, 4 plays, 1 yard field goal drive. Cairo Santos kicks it. It starts with a swing pass to Khalil Herbert that goes for a loss of 2. David Montgomery gets stuffed for no gain. And on 3rd and long, Justin Fields drops back, doesn't see what he likes, gets outside the pocket, and there's 4 Bills that have him hemmed in. He scrambles. It's a tuck and run. He only gets 3 yards, and they have to kick a field goal. And so it's just that inability to seize the moment. Again, you mentioned it earlier. They only got 3 points off of those 3 takeaways. They also didn't score, or maybe they settled for a field goal. There was a possession in the first half when they got the ball at the Bills' 38 after a good defensive sequence and a punt return from Dante Pettis, and couldn't squeeze much out of it. The last 2 weeks, 6 takeaways by the defense. It's what you beg for as an offense building, and the Bears have only gotten 10 points out of it. Not going to get it done. Troubling, bothersome, whatever word you want to attach to it.
I don't think there was maybe one defining moment. I think there were a lot of nondescript moments that contributed to a very meh day. And it was unsatisfying for people looking for Justin Fields to provide that electricity that he typically does provide. That's not through always up to him. There's so many other factors that conspire to whether or not he has one of those moments or one of those games. So to me, almost the defining moment was one that represented just how difficult the challenge was with the elements and just how out of sync this offense looked at times to me. So I'm going to choose one where I don't even know that Justin Fields had much to do with it, but it was Sam Mustipher's shotgun snap that was awry and off course. Knocked off course by the wind, I'm told by Patrick Manley, who testified this post game when we were talking about it. I said, Patrick, who knows a little bit something about long snapping and the weather conditions. So, Patrick, could it possibly be the case where a shotgun snap was knocked off course by the wind? And he was like, absolutely true. Yeah. So that was almost a defining moment because it showed just how challenging everything was, how out of sync the offense was. And that was a lost play and a lost day in a lost season.
David, you know how Patrick knows that because in that infamous wind game against the 49ers, he missed the snap. And I believe it's the only missed snap in his entire career, most games played by any Bear in history. And he still beats himself up over that one missed snap in wind conditions that were taking kicks and blowing him onto Lakeshore Drive. And so that is the true sign of a perfectionist. I've always loved talking to Patrick about that given sequence just because of how hard he is on himself and how unforgiving he is with himself in a moment where you're like, okay, like that's why you did play more games than any Bear in history, because you held yourself to a standard that was that elevated. So that's interesting to hear that he had that to offer after the game.
I'm sure that he did not bring that up because he had repressed the memory you have just now reopened. So I'm sure he thanks you very much for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That day was a little bit warmer, I think.
It was.
The Niners. That might have been a Halloween or October-ish day. All right. On the bright side for Justin Fields.
So it's the longest pass of the day, without question to me. And it's in those conditions, the Bears come out in a unique personnel grouping. They've got 3 tight ends, and Velus Jones is the only receiver on the field. And it's essentially a play action shot play to give Velus Jones the opportunity to show that he's fast and can catch a football, right? That's one of the reasons you drafted him. And so they designed this play for him. They turn him loose and he beats the defense. He's got 2 defensive backs. He's got a corner that he beats inside. And then he gets to the ball in front of a retreating DB. And Justin Fields puts on a throw through the wind, whistling through the winter air, and Velus Jones makes a sliding catch. It goes for 44 yards, and it's a big moment for a quarterback who's trying to continue to come along in that regard, and a bigger moment for a young receiver who has just been under an avalanche of struggle for months. And him being able to make that play was it's not a breakthrough. It doesn't make up for all the mistakes he's made previously, but it's a bit of feel good energy. The bad part of it, David, is that was 44 of the Bears' 88 yards in the second half. Half of it came on that play, and that's all they had to offer. But when you look at the way that ball was thrown and then the way that they just schemed up a play for a guy who's fast, and Justin said after the game, I'm glad Velus had a chance to finally show his speed. Show us more of that.
Yeah, because I don't know that there were many plays like that are sort of defining moments or bright spots, because there was only 209 yards of offense. So you look at how limited the production was, it's pretty easy to find a play that was on the bright side like that. The only question I have about that, and it was a nice play, Velus Jones adjusted to the pass. I felt like he came down sure-handedly with the reception. Did Justin Fields mean to throw it that way? Was it like a golfer playing a drive and he was playing the wind and he knew if he threw it left, it would veer right? And how did he play that? Or was that accidental or on purpose? But the bottom line is, as they say, it looks like a line drive in the box score because it was a 44-yard gain. And let's face it, nobody needed that one more than Velus Jones, because I was asked this morning, a caller on the Mully and Haugh show, do you trust Velus Jones now? I don't know if I'm there yet, but
No.
it did take a step in that direction.
Yeah, no, like I say, it doesn't make up for everything.
Right.
But, you want to see positive moments rather than negative moments. It was there. Justin was asked post-game if he felt like he had control over that pass because of the conditions you mentioned. And he was just deadpan, said, I had control, never a doubt. And then he joked that before the play, he threw grass up in the air and was testing the wind. He said that he was just kidding about that. But obviously he knew enough to put the ball where his receiver could get it, and they were able to connect on that play. I believe I have to double check this because I'm still working on my QB rewind for ChicagoTribune.com, but I think that was the 15th Justin Fields completion this year for at least 30 yards. So that's signs of an offense that can hit those big plays.
I wish they would have gone downfield more. I know the conditions were bad, but I was screaming to myself and going on social media, like, throw the ball down the field, Luke Getsy. I don't know why they got so conservative. I don't know that they were someone was taken away from them, but I would have liked to see them try more shots down the field.
Yeah, well, like I say, this Sunday will be indoors, and there'll be no excuse about conditions, and we'll see what their game plan looks like and what their receiving core looks like, whether Chase Claypool will be back, and we'll see if they're able to get a few more of those deep shots.
What was your uh-oh moment?
Well, my uh-oh moment is just the combination of the lack of splash plays that we saw from Justin Fields as a runner. When you're talking about a quarterback who has just taken over the highlight reels week after week after week with his running ability, and he gets out on the first play of the game, David, and he turns it into a 7-yard scramble and slide, and then for the rest of the day, he's got 2 scrambles for 4 yards and 3 designed quarterback runs that netted 0 yards. Okay. And so that it's not like warning bells. It's not like freak out time, but it's an indicator that if you're an opposing defense and you can take away Justin Fields, the runner, your chances of winning go up exponentially. And the Bears are going to have to respond to that. They're going to have to find their counterpunch. They're going to have to find their answer because we saw it. Sean McDermott again said it was a great display of disciplined football by his defense, of understanding exactly what their assignments were and their responsibilities were in keeping Justin Fields, the runner, from beating them, and they succeeded. And again, you just talked about the lack of downfield passing attempts and the weather and all those things. But man, the Bills really put forth an effort that tells you you can quickly diffuse that explosive playmaking ability if you just concentrate on one thing.
Yeah, my moment came on his final pass of the day when he got his foot stepped on and created this citywide panic over how healthy he can stay in the final 2 games. And I just sensed that when you saw him not return and Nathan Peterman came in to mop up and look pretty good in doing so, that here we go again. We're going to have this conversation for the final 2 games. Should he play? Should he not play? I think you get better at playing football by playing football. And I'm with Matt Eberflus, and I understand why he wants to lean into the improvement that can take place over the final 2 games for a quarterback that needs to show more in the passing game. Despite all of the other things that we can celebrate, that remains an area where he can get better at, and you get better at doing that by doing that. So there could be moments that await him. And so when he got stepped on, when he looked gingerly, and you saw after the game what was to come of that, I thought to myself, here we go again. So that was my moment. How about your key number?
So it's an extension of what I talked about just a minute ago. It's 80. It's more than 100 yards below the season per game average that the Bears had in rushing yards. They rushed for only 80 yards. We had the 7 rushes for 11 yards by Justin Fields. That included that errant snap by Sam Mustipher that ended up being a negative 2-yard rush for Justin Fields on the stat sheet. David Montgomery went 16 carries for 62 yards. Okay day, but really after the big 28-yard run in the first quarter, he was bottled up. And Khalil Herbert, in his return from a hip injury, 6 carries for 7 yards. They got dominated up front by the Buffalo Bills, and they never really established a run the way they've been establishing the run. And once again, once you take away a team's strength, now they're on their way to 209 total yards for the day, which, by the way, was their second lowest output of the season, trailing or ahead of only the monsoon game output against the 49ers in week 1.
My key number was 119. That was the number of passing yards Justin Fields had. And you don't want to get caught up on, explaining why, and we can make excuses, and there are valid explanations, but still 119. This is an offense that we felt like had begun to turn a corner. And this was an offense that, dare I say, for a 4-game stretch, which seemed like a very long time ago, was described as explosive. So when I see 119 yards passing, I think that that's not good enough regardless of the opponent. 119 yards passing is a good half for quarterbacks as elite as Justin Fields wants to be and can be one day. So if you're accepting of the 119 yards passing, your standards aren't high enough. So I just think that when you look at the key number that comes away, you look at them all, the passer rating, the completions, and all this and that, even though it was a very cold day, historically bad at Soldier Field, 119 passing yards is not something you can feel good about.
Baker Mayfield 185 yards before halftime in his Christmas Day blowout of the Denver Broncos. The Bears now have been below 150 net passing yards 10 times in 15 games. Raise the bar. Raise the bar.
We have a lot to get to in our final segment, so instead of the 2-minute drill, let's call it the 4-minute drill.
The 2-minute drill. The 2-minute drill.
Close enough. So, Dan, I appreciated what you had to put on the Twitter machine on Monday morning. I knew you were going to get some pushback, but I think the points are valid. I'll let you take it from there, but I think the overall theme was that this experience against the Buffalo Bills, which followed up a game against the Philadelphia Eagles, 2 straight weeks against 2 teams that you could envision playing each other in this year's Super Bowl, underscored and emphasized just how far the Bears do have to go. In spite of the fact that this season, if it was committed to finding your quarterback, congratulations, you did that. But now that you've answered that question, so many others look glaring and very difficult to address. This is going to take a while. Yeah.
So a couple things. I'm going to read you some thoughts from my Twitter thread here in a second and get your reaction, because it'll be good to have that discussion. But I also want to point out that this rationale that the Bears aren't getting blown out that often is such a weird high school lens on things, right? Like high school teams getting blown out often is something to be concerned about. NFL teams getting blown out often almost never happens. We all know how this league is set up. We all know how these games come down to close games in the fourth quarter, and it's the teams that have playmakers to finish things off that win at the highest level. And so this idea that, they're hanging in games is enough for me. I looked it up today because I had somebody come at me in the Twitter thread and say that, the Bears are consistently covering the spread, so that means that they're outperforming expectations. Well, they're 5-9-1 against the spread this year, and actually they have now lost 4 games by at least 20 points, which is more than either the 2015, 2016 John Fox-led Bears teams did. And so this idea that suddenly they're at some acceptable level of competitiveness because they've only lost by 20 points 4 times, it's mind-boggling to me. So now that segues me right into some of what I tweeted on Monday morning that got the expected blowback. And of course we can sound it out here, but I said, my first tweet I sent out said, if you are watching the Bears objectively, it's stunningly obvious how steep their climb back toward relevance will be. Would love to hear the counter argument to that. I said, at this point, the Bears can't stop the run, can't rush the passer, struggle to protect their quarterback, and have the league's worst passing attack. Their 4-game offensive eruption was 5 games ago now. They need playmakers and quality depth across the board. To be playing meaningful football in December 2023, the Bears will have to be almost perfect in their personnel acquisitions, see a surplus of key developmental breakthroughs, and have supreme injury luck. At this point, most Bears optimism is justifiably centered around Justin Fields' playmaking ability, but then mostly furthered by imagination.
See, that's interesting. I think you got a lot there, and not that you were inviting the kind of scrutiny you received or the pushback, but certainly if you put it in those terms, you're going to get it. Only because I think it's brutally honest. Here's the only thing I would not push back at, but I think a couple key questions come to mind.
Yeah.
Number one, when you talk about the steep climb, you're exactly right. It is a steep climb back to relevance, respectability, playoff contention, wherever you want to place that bar. But I think that's the key question. Steep climb, how high are you going? How high do you feel like you need to go to justify some of this hope that has surfaced this season? Because it is the NFL, and I always believe this. Now, when we can talk about the Bears being 2 off seasons away from being at the level that they can compete with the Bills and the Eagles and prevent themselves from having 4 games of 4 losses by at least 20 points, you've got to do that. But how high is that destination point, that finish line? Because if the steep climb is to get to respectability in the playoffs, then I think that with a creative offseason, with a, catching lightning in the bottle, with a coaching staff that's dynamic, you might be in a position where you're more competitive in 2023, and that may be acceptable because that's better than being 3-12. If we're sitting here a year from now and we're talking about a 5-win Bears team in December, that's not good enough. That to me is not good enough. But I do think that if you're sitting there in December with you're one of these teams in the hunt, that's more realistic. And Dan, I would say that might be more attainable depending on how successfully you navigate this offseason.
How successfully you navigate this offseason with a surplus of draft picks and a lot of cap money. That's what everybody's really excited about. And that's why my last word and what I just read to you a minute ago was imagination, because it's right. People imagining and envisioning what this team could look like. Brad Biggs pointed out that over the weekend, the Bears lost 2 of their key contributors for 2023 in Elton Jenkins and Jack Conklin, right? 2 offensive linemen who people dreamed were going to be on the starting line in front of Justin Fields, and they're suddenly re-signed by the teams they play for.
Okay, okay. You opened that door, so let me walk through it. How did we think these people were going to be members of the Bears teams? This was put out there.
Imagination.
Fans with websites have imagination. This is what happens when we open the door that wide to entertain this notion that we want to believe things that may or may not be true. That's not reporting them. That is wishing for them. And you can wish for all these guys to come to the Bears in free agency, and you can have $100 million to spend, but it doesn't mean you're going to spend it wisely, and it doesn't mean that you're going to get people to take it. It doesn't even mean these guys are going to be available, because the 2 guys that you mentioned aren't.
Right, and they didn't even have a chance to have a contract discussion with them in February or March with their camps. David, there's so much that goes into this with this idea that they're just going to go into a supermarket that has everything that they need, and they just got to pick off the shelves and then go to the register and use the self-checkout, and off you go into the parking lot with the team that can compete in 2023. You have to still go through the draft and free agency and get guys. And listen, like what I've been saying for weeks now is it's okay as a fan to entertain best case scenarios. But all I'm asking is that you also acknowledge worst case scenarios and find somewhere in the middle where you say, okay, this is probably more realistic. It's not the best case scenario. It's not the worst case scenario. What's realistic for them to get done? You talk to people around the league and they say the Bears could probably add a 6 quality contributors this offseason. And that means guys that can be, difference-making contributors, most likely starters, to your next playoff team, whether that's 23, 24, 25. That's a pretty big number, and that's going to take everything going right to get a 6. And they need probably 12.5 at this point, particularly based on what a lot of people say on Twitter and saying, you got to get rid of 70% of the roster, and then you just start from scratch and you build a playoff contender.
Twitter's not real life. I mean, let's
sorry, I got to get off there.
But I do think that that's an interesting number. A couple thoughts come to mind. Number one, 6 would to me suggest that you're going to get 3 instant contributors in the draft. Drafting where you are, you should, especially if you turn your high picks into multiple picks, you could get 3 contributors in the draft. They did last draft, and they should have the same kind of standard this draft. Secondly, that would leave 3 for free agency. That's probably a tall order in free agency. That's more than you would typically want to go into free agency to get or to buy. And yet I do think it's realistic that the Bears go into free agency with that in mind. What positions they are? Well, that determines on what's available, what's affordable, and how desperate you become. As for the best and worst case scenarios, you're exactly right. You want to find somewhere in the middle. The problem, Dan, is that what you're putting out there, while fans in the media want to push back at this, is because they want to believe the best case scenario is more likely than the worst case scenario, when in fact I think what your opinions are based on, not to speak for you, but you've been around here long enough to understand the Bears have been closer to the worst case scenario than they have the best case. And so typically that will lead us to believe and inform our own opinions that they're going to be more likely to follow that path than they are the other one, because the other one just doesn't happen often enough.
Right. And look, there are going to be missteps along the way. There are going to be draft picks that fizzle and fade. Guys that on draft weekend, people are talking about as being, 10-year Bears with incredible credentials that by the time it comes time to see whether they're in their 5th season with the team, you look around and go, whatever happened to that guy? Right. How many times has that happened?
Right.
Ryan Pace picked 4 times in a row in the top 10 and didn't get a single one of those guys to a second contract with the team. So, like there are going to be missteps along the way. And you said something that, I don't know, it's dangerous territory, but I think it's part of the issue that we're running into within this season is it's the phrase fans in the media, and it's folks that are selling only the upper right corner of the photograph, right? And they've photoshopped out all the mess and all the debris and everything else and say, look here, because this is the beautiful timeshare we're going to sell you. And then you get there and it's, right next to a dumpster. And there's a...
And let me be perfectly clear here. This is not said with any individual or group in mind. This is just a general response to the tone that is out there and the way the industry has changed, not just in Chicago. This is everywhere. This isn't just a Bears media, Bears town type of thing. You look around, every sport has it. Every city kind of has gone through it, especially ones that struggle to the extent that Chicago sports teams have. Objectivity is being misinterpreted as negativity. And maybe it will come off that way to some people, but they aren't the same thing. There's a very distinct, subtle difference between objectivity and negativity. And I think what's happened this year is we have seen that not everyone understands that. And that's okay. And that may sound like, we are doing a different job or whatever, and we're judging people. But stop covering the coverage and stop evaluating the way that we're interpreting things, because what it is that, the Bears can do this and the Bears can get better, but there's a long way to go, objectively speaking. So don't see things that aren't necessarily there.
I also want to get into this later in the week because I've pulled up some research. The Bears lost their 12th game on Saturday afternoon, and the idea that they can turn it around is different from the notion that they will turn it around. And there's all the, everybody wants to tell you about the 2020 Bengals and all the success stories of teams that flip the switch and turn around, but they never tell you about like the 2006 Raiders or like the 2018, I'd have to go find my list again, but the Jaguars from 2012. And the number of teams that lose 12 games in a season and go on the next year to make the playoffs is half as many as the number of teams that lose 12 games in a season and lose at least 10 the following season as well. Right. And so like when you're doing the math game, you say, no, I'm not telling you that it's impossible. I have never said that it's impossible for the Bears to have a breakthrough season in 2023 and be one of these teams that flips the switch and gets in the playoffs. But I'm also telling you it's very possible that they're 6-11 and 7-10 next year. And that if you look at their roster as currently constructed and identify how many shrewd hit moves it's going to take to get themselves in position to win 8, 9, or 10 games, you go, I don't know if I can lean in that direction realistically, because my brain tells me reasonably that it has a lower percentage, right? Is it impossible? No, but percentages say that the other thing is going to happen. Remind me later in the week, because I want to pull up some of those numbers for you exactly to give you an indication of this is a 20-year sample size of teams. It's 97 teams that have finished with at least 12 losses from 2002 to 2021, and then what they've done the following year, because it will boggle your mind to see how often it doesn't turn the corner, and then people only remember the times that it does.
Look forward to that. And the last thought I have on this is that it's very conceivable to me that the Bears could be in the 6-7 victory range in 2023, and Justin Fields could still be a Pro Bowl quarterback. That doesn't have to be one related to the other. He could be a winning player on a losing team. He could realize his potential, maybe not as, the winning aspect, and that would be the storyline and the narrative, and can he do this and that. But I do think it's conceivable that in year 3 of his NFL career, Justin Fields could take that step to become a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback, and yet the Bears could still be in a double-digit loss kind of situation from a roster perspective. That's not crazy.
Didn't Deshaun Watson lead the NFL in passing yards for a 12-loss football team?
Yeah, I think so. I have to look
right?
it up, but I think you're right. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
So how much do you need to have going right around you as a game-changing playmaking quarterback to even sniff success? Justin Herbert's had 3 tremendous seasons. I think he's got 13,000 plus passing yards in 3 seasons, and he's still sitting on a team that's just trying to get its claws in the cliff to climb back into the in the hunt graphics and hang around. The other part of this, we mentioned this a little bit ago, and I wanted to get your perspective on this because it was that week 7 through week 10 surge where the Bears scored and scored and scored and scored, and they averaged 31 points per game for that 4-game stretch, and everyone thought that this was the new normal, that this was here to stay. Explosive offense every week. The Bears can score with the best of them. They're one of the highest scoring teams in the NFL for this 4-week span, yada yada. And then here we are, 5 games later. The last 4 Justin Fields starts, they've averaged 19 points per game. I get it. There's been attrition. Darnell Mooney's not here anymore. Chase Claypool's been hurt. The offensive line's reshuffling. They've played some different competition. But you can't also just sort of selectively choose a 4-game sample size in a 17-game season and say, this is who we are going to be, while ignoring the other 12 starts that your quarterback makes and the statistical outputs that come from those starts. And so I just can't stress it enough. You know, David, you've been around this league long enough to understand what it means. And this goes back to your original question on what is relevant. So coming out of the 2018 season, Steve Leventhal is a guy who kind of pops in and out of the beat. And he had written a book on the 2018 Bears, and it became kind of a laughing joke for Rich Campbell and I, because the title of the book was Return to Respectability. And we laughed about it because it was like, this is what they write books about when they're talking about the Chicago Bears in the 21st century. Return to respectability. We won a division crown and then lost in the first round of playoffs. But it's like, so relevance. That's a word you brought up just a minute ago. What is relevance? To me, relevance is having a team that is capable of having 3 consecutive winning seasons, something the Bears organization hasn't achieved since 1988. And so you can have these wishes on hey, we can be in the hunt graphic in December 2023. Okay, is that your goal? Is that your destination, is to jump in the hunt graphic? Are you trying to pursue championships? Are you trying to give yourself a bite at the apple every year where you're in the playoff hunt year after year after year after year, and you can have this enjoyable experience of going after championships because you've got a roster that can sustain success? Under those guidelines, under those benchmarks, this roster is so damn far from being able to put together 3 consecutive winning seasons. And you're going to have to be really, really good in the next offseason and the one after that and the one after that and the one after that to be one of those teams.
And to do that, you have to be a draft-driven team. I don't think you can do that by relying on free agency each and every year. To sustain success, it has to start from within. And maybe that's part of what this Bears season would represent. You've seen some growth in some young rookies, Braxton Jones, Jaquan Brisker, I think Kyler Gordon, you mentioned. Josh Blackwell is a player I think doesn't get a lot of attention, but I think he's a guy. Jack Sanborn. These are names that may be part of the team that when the Bears do make it back to the playoffs, provided that does happen, but that sustained success, the beginning of relevance. I like the idea of having 3 consecutive years of competing, of winning and being that team. Yeah, that's a good measuring stick, and I think a good way to gauge that. The other thing, so that brings us to the draft. When I talk about draft driven, we haven't talked about it. I'm sure we'll spend a lot of time on it, but now half game between the Houston Texans and the Chicago Bears. There's a difference to me, Dan, in drafting number 1 overall and drafting number 2 overall, because I think 1 starts an auction if you're drafting number 1 overall. Number 2, you could justify taking a player who is what they refer to as a generational talent and put in the middle of your defense or on the edge. And that'll be a debate that'll be ongoing. But I do think that it just underscores and it just reinforces what we're saying, is that you have to almost have a perfect off season, and it would begin with making those right decisions at the top of the draft.
Yeah. Well, but again, this all comes back to making the right decisions, whether you're drafting at 2 or 7 or 13. I mean, the player that Bears fans are more excited about than any player they've been excited about in 15 years was drafted at number 11 overall when they went into the draft with the 21st pick. Right. So it doesn't guarantee anything being up at the top. In that same draft, the New York Jets took Zach Wilson. right? And I think we're seeing how that's working out for them right now. So you still have to make right decisions, and celebrating like a lottery jackpot just because you got the pick is it's just imprudent until you see what you actually do with the pick, and who the guys are that are making the pick, and whether they can have that thought process. Again, we also talk about them only picking once in the top 50 because you've given your pick that could be as high as number 32 overall, likely number 33 or somewhere in that range, to the Pittsburgh Steelers for Chase Claypool, who's now dealing with a knee injury that's kept him out for 2 weeks, and you don't know if he's going to be a difference-making part of your next playoff team. So, I mean, like I say, I go back to that word imagination, and it requires some imagination. And I don't condemn fans for imagining and thinking like, how can we get this thing back on a more enjoyable plane for us? How can this become an experience that is like some other teams around the league experience on a regular basis? Go for it. Dream about that. But also just understand that you can acknowledge that there are other alternative realities that, or other alternative scenarios that can play out based on what happens all the time in this league.
Before we get out of here, the Bears haven't had a number 1 overall pick since 1947. Do you remember who that was?
Can't even come up with a guess.
See, you need to read 10 Thoughts.
I did, and I already forgot it.
Bob Fenimore, our guy Bob Fenimore, the old halfback from Oklahoma A&M, played safety. 10 games he lasted. And I don't even think that Mel Kiper was around to break down that draft. That was 1947. And the number 1 overall selection, Chicago Bears, that was the last time they drafted first overall. I'll
go get you a scouting report before our Later in the Week podcast on Bob Fenimore's pre-draft analysis.
Oklahoma A&M. Is there still an Oklahoma A&M? Did they merge with somebody?
I don't know.
All right. Anything else that we have overlooked, neglected, or failed to address?
No, the Lions defense is terrible. We'll get into more of that later in the week. They just got absolutely run over by the Carolina Panthers on Saturday afternoon. And so if you're trying to get a get-well remedy for the Bears running game and for the offense, it's a good time to be stopping through Detroit for New Year's.
And we will drop this on Tuesday morning. Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. You also can watch us on the Odyssey's YouTube channel, on 670 The Score's YouTube channel. We're getting a bigger audience, so go ahead and check us out. Give us some feedback, react, throw things at your computer screen if you wish, but just make sure that you aim for Dan. He's on the right. I'm on the left. You can aim for both of us if you wish.
David, I think that we have one more podcast in the calendar year, right, of 2022. And I think our producer, Adam Studzinski, told us the other day that we are about to click past maybe 250,000 downloads. That's pretty cool to have that audience building. And so I just wanted to tell everyone out there that's listening and watching that we appreciate their loyalty, and we appreciate them being patient with us, even though we tell them things that they may not want to hear sometimes.
Listen, after a 3-12 start to this season, we definitely appreciate you showing as much interest as you have in a team that is capable and on its way to setting a franchise record for losses. Imagine, there's that imagination word again. Imagine when they're finally good, how many people will be flocking to their computers and downloading the Take the North podcast.
You just gave me the idea for the title of the next Bears book, Finally Good.
Finally good. Okay, I'm still going to stick with coldest reality yet.
There you go.
That's chapter 1 of this season. All right, so we're going to wrap it up. We'll be back on Friday morning with another podcast, episode 40 on Friday morning. This is 39. It will drop on Tuesday morning. For Dan Wiederer, thank you for listening. I'm David Haugh and Adam Studzinski. Talk to you on Friday.
Great talk. See you out there.